It looks like we're down a couple of people. Any idea where everybody is?
I'm getting vaccinated tomorrow morning. First dose? I'm doing Johnson Johnson.
One shot.
I got it there now. First dose on Wednesday. Was the second dose really bad for you?
It was bad enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I got at 10 a.m. on a Thursday, felt fine all day Thursday. Thursday night, I didn't sleep well. I felt cold, like I had fever chills. And then the next day, I was like weak and in that kind of state where, like my temperature's not right kind of state. So I just took the day off and just, laid around.
Yeah.
I'm at the point in my life where I don't take a lot of sick days. So if I feel off like that, and especially when people have already said, you can just take it. I mean, but a lot of people didn't even, I think a lot of people have gotten responses about that level, reactions about that level, but a lot of people don't even get that. And yeah, that was with the second one. And my understanding is it actually is a good sign in this sense. It means that the inoculation is getting your body to respond the way it would respond to exposure to the virus. So it's good. So, I mean, having a reaction is evidence that it's causing your body to kick into overdrive. All right, so today we will talk about book 11 of Augustine's Confessions, Philosophy of Time. To briefly remind you of the outline of the Confessions. Creation, fall or fallenness, redemption and the road to redemption, blessedness, so again, this is book 1. I would say this is book 2. This is roughly books 3 through 8. Book 9 is blessedness. And then 10 through 13 are on give you sort of the philosophical conditions for narrative. And last time with book 10, we talked about memory. Without memory, it's impossible to understand yourself as an ongoing developing being, which is what biography and autobiographic projects require. Today, we'll talk about book 11, which is time. So, if you only thought of this as Augustine's autobiography, and you didn't think of it as a philosophical text, having a chapter on memory and a chapter on time would seem really weird and out of place, wouldn't it? But if we're trying to investigate the deeper sort of philosophical conditions needed for narrative, then you need time, because you need time to understand oneself as a developing entity over time. Without time, it'd be impossible to distinguish any one event from any other events. You need structures like time and space to distinguish things from one another. So that's the significance of time. And then book 12 will be on form and matter, which of course are ancient philosophical categories. And then book 13 will be on creation, where Augustine will give one of the earliest that I'm aware of allegorical interpretations of Genesis, chapters 1, 2, and 3, where he will try to synthesize the Christian worldview with the Platonian worldview. So he will interpret the days of creation as components that fit well with Platonian philosophy, which is always funny to hear contemporary people talk about metaphorical interpretations of Genesis as if they're like some new thing that people invented, like, the last 50 years to explain Darwin. I mean, they were already around when Augustine wrote this in the 4th century. All right, so that's where we are. Initial thoughts on book 10 on a philosophy of time.
I noticed this in chapter 16, but I liked kind of the talking about like measurement of time and how like the perception of time is kind of weird, how we're able to measure it, but it's like I essentially just thought Einstein would have a great conversation with Augustine.
Yeah.
And I know very little about that theory or like quantum mechanics or whatever, but I just know that the whole idea of time, we kind of, especially in today's society, time is just like, because everything is structured around the clock.
Oh, sure. American society is very, very chronological, very temporal.
Before that kind of came, I know that came from like trains essentially. But before that, it was just kind of the days went on and you just worked from sun up to sundown, and it kind of made sense. But yeah, I just find it interesting. Yeah, time being perceived.
Yeah, well, I mean, Augustine definitely sets us up for a good discussion of relative and objective senses of time. And he is a presentist in the sense that he claims that only the present truly exists.
I was going to add that Dominion kind of flickered my power this morning, so all the clocks were off this morning.
Fun.
And it's happened before, and I've had the thought, but it was funny that it happened at the same time. We were talking about this book, like, you wake up and my watch is still correct. I don't know where my phone is, but I'll call someone. My watch is the only thing that tells me what reality is, because all the other clocks are just blinking 00 or like 2 a.m. or something. Like, how you can't function without this fake concept that we all use to communicate with each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's makes it much easier to order a society. Other thoughts, other reactions? Augustine on time?
Basically, the same as book 10. That's what I got.
The same as book 10,
Same as book 10.
which is this is the same content, or it's like obscure like book 10?
A big chunk on God is great,
Yeah.
and then obscure content, and then God is great, eternal, and created everything.
Well, that's kind of the medieval recipe for a book. Throw in some scripture references.
I have another question about like the relationship between these philosophy and time and memory.
Yes.
So if memory is, especially when it comes to God, like knowing God is to remember Him, kind of.
There is an aspect of it, yes.
Especially when it comes from Neoplatonism.
Right.
What does that have to do with time? Because if I'm thinking of memory existing only in the present, that means those things don't exist, but the memory of them does. But because it exists in the present, it is real. But if memory is just, if all knowledge is memory.
All right, so.
Yeah. I need a whiteboard explanation.
Yeah.
I saw the years around it. I kind of just broke.
So for humans, we live in the present, in the now. We are capable of distending our mind so that we grasp the past. And this is memory. and we're capable of extending our mind into the future, which is, I believe that's called anticipation. So memory enables us to connect the past to ourselves in the now. And this dot kind of travels forward over time, but the dot is the only thing that's actually real. Now, but here's what makes it sort of, so this is the human subjective time. But to make sense of this, you need to keep in mind, for Augustine, God exists in eternity, in the eternal now, which is what is present to God. And what is present to God is the entirety of the human timeline, all at once, all the time, all eternally. So sometimes lay Christians say something like this: God is outside of time. That's kind of true, but not really Augustine's point. A better way to think of it, in my mind, is to say that God is omnitemporal. So just as God is in every place spatially, God is present, or all of time is present to God all the time. And that is what, from our subjective point of view, gives time the appearance of objectivity, because it is sort of nailed down by God's eternal ongoing perception of it.
I have one more question.
We are down the rabbit hole, people.
I have one more question. So if memory is only within, like on that dot for the human subjective time, only that dot is real?
Yes.
Is memory, is memory just...
Memory
Is it not real, or is it?
Memory is a way of expanding your access. Yeah. So the past is real because God is present at it. So and eternally so. The past is subjective in its reality to us. And here's the thing about memory: you can forget things all the time and therefore lose the past. And you can incorrectly remember it, and therefore what is real to you is not the objective past. So just as anticipation, with anticipation, we can even more so be obviously wrong about what we expect. But even what we assume is right about the past often is wrong. I mean, this is always disturbing to get a little older and realize that maybe what you're sure happened in the past you should be a little more doubtful. I mean, maybe you thought the story was one thing and some detail comes out and now you think of it differently. Maybe your parents divorced and you blamed one as a child and some important detail comes out 20 years later to you and you're like, oh, it's the other way. Or maybe you thought of yourself one way about your high school persona, and you go to a reunion, and somebody says something to you, or several people say something to you that make you say, "Oh, maybe I had more friends than I thought," or maybe the opposite. Maybe I didn't have nearly as many friends as I thought in high school. Maybe those weren't the best days of my life after all. So only the present is real. Or actually, the way to say it is only the present exists because the past is gone, except in as much as we access it by memory. That is a way of reaching out and giving it a sort of an existence. but it has no ongoing existence outside of the mind, God's or ours. So you need God in a theory like this, otherwise, you've got like things popping out of existence and back into existence, and yeah, that would be bad. George Washington no longer exists because nobody remembers him. I mean, which would be an implication of this. But God always remembers. All right, let's see, what else? Other reactions to book 10.
I just got a little bit lost at the part where he was explaining how, was it like how God interacts with time through Christ? That's the word.
Yes. Do you have a chapter in mind? That's my early one.
It was earlier on towards the
Yes.
7 and 8.
yes.
Yes, the Logos, the beginning of John chapter 1, Christ as Logos is a very important philosophical point. So chapter 7. So you call us to understand the word, Logos, God with you, O God, which is spoken eternally, in which all things are spoken eternally. Nor is it the case that what was spoken is ended and that another thing is said. So that all things may at length be said, all things are spoken once and forever. Elsewise, there would already be time and change, and neither true eternity nor true immortality. I know this, my God, and I give thanks for it. I know this, I confess to you, O Lord God, and together with me, whoever is grateful to the sure truth knows this and blesses you. We know, O Lord, we know, since in so far as anything which once was, now no longer is, and anything which once was not, now is, to that extent, such a thing dies and takes rise. Therefore, no part of your word gives place to another, or takes the place of another, since it is truly eternal and immortal. Therefore, you say once and forever all that you say by the word, who is co-eternal with you. Whatever you say shall be made, and then it is made. But while you do not make anything otherwise than by speaking, yet not all things which you make by speaking are made simultaneously and eternally. All right. So the Trinity has always existed eternally, prior to the existence of time and space. Time has to be brought into existence as part of creation ex nihilo, and it is sort of co-created by God Father and God Son, the Logos. So Christ is not a created thing. And you need God in eternity in part to explain God's unchangingness. But if you want a world with change, then you need sequence and time. So Augustine is trying to navigate those tensions. The stability, eternality of God, the flexing, the changing of the changes that go with this world. And here, let's punt to Plato again. Here's Plato's divided line. Here are the stable and unchanging things. Here are the things that are changing and in flux. Now here you have to make a difference from Plato, though. For Plato put all immaterial things above the divided line, and all material things beneath the divided line. And clearly the material things will map onto the human world of creation. But you have to do something different for humanity, body and soul, because the human soul is eternally existent, but it undergoes change. So that becomes one of the more difficult things for the Platonist and Christian metaphysics to explain. But that also is what makes it sort of the component that ties the reality of the existent present to the past and the future. Why can it do that? In part because it's immaterial. It is the most godlike part of us. It is the most obviously eternal part of us. Although the medievals, because they have to, because of the annoyingness of St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, they have to have the human not just be the soul, but also the body, including in the afterlife. But yeah. So the logos, which is the word, which is Christ, is that which gives structure and creation to the world. So where does time and space and the world come from? Through the act of eternal creation, through the co-creation of Father and Son. Whew, I'm tired. All right, let's see. Is there anything else in here that I really need to discuss? So time has a beginning. There is a literal objective T1 from God's point of view in God's act of creation. It is creation. It is part of creation ex nihilo, as Genesis says, in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. So time is not cyclical. And in that sense, from God's perspective, time is not relative. It's relative from our experience and perspective of it. All right, one other thing I want to make sure I hit. How do we measure time? The view of many of the ancient philosophers was that the motions of the planets was not just a measurement of time, but was somehow constitutive of time, was what time was, simply the movement of the planets. And Augustine, of course, is going to disagree with that because the time is sort of held in place not by our perception of the planet's movements and not by our own perception, but in the eternal mind of God. So I think those were the most important points about time I wanted to hit. What was God doing before he made the heavens and the earth? There's the sarcastic joke answer, preparing hell for people who would ask such frivolous questions. But there is a puzzle about the nature of time and the nature of eternity post this life for humans that this raises. Will time continue in the same sort of mode, or are we somehow, do we somehow start to enter eternity after this existence? So there is a view of eternity in which when you die and you reach eternity, you might be able to meet your great-grandkids on the moment of entering eternity. Why? Because eternity is all of time all at once. There's also some question as to whether activity would really be possible in the afterlife, or is eternity sort of a static state because everything that could happen and will happen is already happening all at once? Which is one of the places where you get some really negative views of God as sort of not capable of interacting, frozen, static. I've written a little bit about this. I tend to think those views of that interpretation of what it means to be eternal is incorrect, but those interpretations aren't out there. So yeah, an image of eternity in chapter 13. It is not in time that you precede time, elsewise you would not precede all time. You precede all past times in the sublimity of an ever-present eternity, and you surpass all future times because they are to come, and when they come, they shall be past. But you are the selfsame, and your years shall not fail. Your years neither come nor go, but our years come and go, so that all of them may come. Your years stand out all at once, because they are steadfast. Departing years are not turned away by those that come, because they never pass away. But these years of ours shall all be, when they all shall be no more. Your years are one day, and your day is each day. But today, because with you today does not give way to tomorrow, nor does it succeed yesterday. With you today is eternity. Therefore you begot the co-eternal, to which you said, this day I have begotten you. You have made all times, and you are before all times, and not at any time was there no time. Sally says seashells at the seashore. Whew. So all that to say, God does not exist in time and did not create time within time, but exists in a different mode of temporal existence.
I don't want to sound like a better, but God sounds like a Chalcomandorian.
Like a what?
Chalcomandorian.
Explain it.
Oh, no, if you haven't read it, I'm not gonna read it now. Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five.
Oh, no, I was supposed to read that for a class I didn't.
It's an alien that experiences time all at once.
Yeah. Also, much like Dr. Manhattan of the Watchmen. Can time be long or short? Time of measurement. Oh, so yeah, Augustine basically uses this to explain prophecy. How can God engage in prophecy and send prophets with prophetic prediction? Well, on this account, it's not that hard to see how God can predict what's happened because it's already happened. He's already experienced it. He's already there. So how can Isaiah 53 foreshadow the coming of Christ? Because Isaiah's time and Christ's time according to Augustine, are one and the same time in the eternal now of God. The present of things past is memory. The present of things present is intuition. The present of things future is expectation. If I am permitted to say this, then I see three things, and I affirm that there are three things. If it may be said that there are three times, past, present, and future, as common usage incorrectly puts it. This may be stated. Note that I am not concerned over this. Do not object to it. Do not criticize it. As long as we understand what we say, namely, that what is future is not now existent, nor is that which is past. There are a few things that we state properly, and many that we speak improperly. But what we mean is understood. In medieval discussions of omnipotence, one of the things that God cannot do is to change the past. And this view of eternity explains why a medievalist would believe that God cannot change the past. Why can God not change the past? Because the past is eternal and is sort of runs into the present. To change the past would be to change something sort of eternal and in a certain sense necessary in the universe. Or to put it differently, if God had acted to change what would have been the present, we would never have remembered it as the past, and we would simply remember it as the past in the current now. Though that point is fairly controversial. Bodily motion is time. In chapter 23 is the discussion of the relationship between the movements of the planets and time. And Augustine, of course, comes down on the idea that the movement of the planets measures time, but is not itself time or constituent of time. Chapter 28, but how is the future, which as yet does not exist, diminished or consumed? Or how does the past, which no longer exists, increase, unless there are three things in the mind, which does all this? It looks forward, it considers, it remembers. So that the reality to which it looks forward passes through what it considers into what it remembers. Who then denies that future things are not yet existent? Yet there is already in the mind an expectation of things to come. Who denies that past things no longer exist? Yet there is still in the soul the memory of past things. Who denies the present time lacks spatial extent, since it passes away in an instant. Yet attention abides, and through it what shall be present proceeds to become something absent. It is not then future time that is long, but a long future is a long expectation of the future. Nor is past time, which is not long, but a long past, is a long memory of the past. That's about all I have to say about
Can I ask you an unrelated question?
that. Sure.
What were the two books on the altar of the Council of Trent?
Was it the Bible and Aquinas' Summa Theologica?
Yeah, what is that about?
The Summa Theologica? That is Aquinas' Summary of Theology, which is basically a 3-volume tome, which sums up, basically the essence of the Catholic faith to this day. Starts with theory of God proper, the theory of humanity in general, then the theory of sort of very specific human things, And then it ends with, the third section is like specific Christian doctrines. So it has a very important arc to it. But yeah, those two books sort of tie together in the Catholic tradition. And Aquinas is, in a certain sense, the successor to Augustine, with the most important difference being he favored Aristotle over Plato and Plotinus. And in doing so, frankly, made a much more practical and elegant worldview as far as I'm concerned.
Were we a few weeks ago, like, put a discussion on the Trinity on hold, though we had some time.
We have a little time. We have 10 minutes.
I just wanted to say that I don't have any specifics.
Well, I am not great on the Trinity, but so I will punt to the two best illustrations I am aware of.
Is it the St. Patrick video?
No, it is definitely not St. Patrick.
I think that one's hilarious.
So this is the Athanasian Shield of the Trinity, which helps explain the claim. The claim is that God is the Father, is the Son, is the Holy Spirit, but the Father is not the Son is not the Spirit is not the Father. So the claim is that they are all one, same substance, but that exist as three distinct persons with distinct activities and roles historically. So that's one illustration of the Trinity. A second one see if I can get although if taken to too much of an extreme, this metaphor can get a little problematic. But if you take H2O and you put it at the right temperature and air pressure, you can get it to be solid, liquid, and gaseous form all at the same time. But what's important is that you need to have all three of them continually, distinctly existing, which is why, if you're not careful, this could be a heretical analogy.
I think the more pointed question that we kind of want an answer to is why? Why is the Trinity complicated? Why did modalism take over? Is the proper way to describe three entities of God? Why are there even three entities, three persons in one nature?
Well, here, let me answer the easiest of those questions first. Why does the church not believe in modalism? Because modalism is pretty clearly not taught in the scriptures. The Father, Son, and Spirit are coexistent. Modalism teaches that the Father becomes the Son, becomes the Spirit, and it denies the coexistence of the three persons. So I'll answer that one because I know the answer to that one with some certitude. Why isn't God a single person rather than three persons? One answer would be perhaps a multiplicity of persons is necessary to explain the divine nature in terms of love. Because if you are only one person, maybe love isn't really possible, especially if you're eternally, permanently only one person. Maybe you need that multifaceted nature of the self. It does explain nicely the idea of marriage as an image of God, where you have two persons who become one flesh, one substance in a sense. And at the same time, it has God being more complex than the earthly symbol, which makes God greater than it. But yet it shows sort of a reflection of one another. They're both more complex than the simplified whole of a simplistic oneness. I mean, look, if I were to come up with a metaphysics just out of my own cleverness, I certainly wouldn't have come up with something like that. I might have come up with something like the oneness, one simple God. I wouldn't have come up with something triune.
Anthropologically, this makes more sense for ad councils. They made a simpler religion so that it's easier to convert.
Well, perhaps maybe there's some apologetic value in the opposite direction. Maybe this is somewhat good evidence that it's not just kind of fabricated, not just a bunch of smart people coming up with what can we get people to believe. At the very least, they're trying to be faithful interpreters of the tradition they perceived. At the very least, it's not something that me and my PhD friends would have likely come up with on our own, which frankly is my criticism of many religions and many science fiction stories. My harshest criticism is that's something I would have come up with my buddies when I was 15. But, you can certainly see that in some things. So let's talk about Norse religion and the Norse view of the afterlife of Valhalla, an eternity where warriors get to do their favorite thing all day, battle, and they get to do their favorite thing all night, party, drink, and have sex. I mean, again, that's something I would have come up with my 15-year-old friends, 30 years ago. Things that allude to something better than, or richer, more meaningful than the sorts of things we come up with. To my mind, that has more evidence of its truthfulness than if it's something that I could have come up with. I mean, whenever sort of embracing a belief, it's always worth asking, is this something that there's actually reason to think is true, or is it just sort of convenient to believe this? And if it's too convenient to believe it, if it's too easy that it's something I would have come up with, then I'm a little more skeptical. Which is, by the way, why I hate the media, because they just tell these very simplistic narratives. It's always nice to have a 1960s style cowboy Western where you put one group in white hats and one group in dark hats and say the dark hats are the problem, the bad guys, and the white hats are the heroes, and everything they do is okay and perfect. Instead of having a real life thing where, everyone's pretty gray. But that doesn't accomplish the goals of the media. On that note, anything I can help you with your papers? You're ready to do your peer review due on Friday? All right. Well, for Wednesday, look for some more readings on Book 11, Philosophy of Time. So how did I do with the Trinity?
Oh, I knew you had asked the question, so I just saw the clock and get some time.
I was shaking my head at the water analogy, but then you caveated yourself, so I was like, okay.
Well, here's the thing about the water analogy. You need something that a non-PhD can understand. And I think the